You're under arrest for...
It wasn't just a phone call. It was a recitation of the bomb recipe, stating the defendant...
Yeah, he's on probation 2 times.
I want him under arrest.
Medical treatment that you will not get at the house of correction.
But I was terrified for like 2 hours. I couldn't go anywhere.
Some guys beat their wives because they have no place else to put their anger. A lot of guys beat their wives because they can't.
Because they can. I'm Diane Sawyer. Few domestic abusers would even consider physically or emotionally abusing a boss, a coworker, a friend, a stranger. But for some reason, wives and girlfriends are different.
My words would be to her is, well, if you didn't make me angry, if you didn't do this to me, then you wouldn't have made me angry, then I wouldn't have done that to you. I wouldn't have hit you like that. It was that way all the time.
The thing that it's very difficult for people to understand is most violence, at least from the man's standpoint, is rational behavior. That is, a man is trying to get something. He's trying to get money, he's trying to get sex, he's trying to get compliance, and violence is one mechanism to do that.
As we all know, the O.J. Simpson case raised awareness of domestic violence. That chilling 911 phone call, the graphic photos of Nicole Brown Simpson provided unforgettable evidence that domestic violence affects all socioeconomic groups. And even with the prominent, even with the wealthy, it's often kept quiet.
But I was so embarrassed to tell anybody. I mean, it was my fault. Look what I did. So I thought at the time. Who would believe me? This wonderful man who was so charming and so wonderful and so gregarious to people. And everybody thinks he's so wonderful. How can I tell him how he is behind closed doors?
Ronnie Hammer was married for 28 years to a successful businessman. She knows that an opulent lifestyle doesn't protect someone from abuse.
You think that only drinking behavior, men in tattoos, beat up their wives on a low socioeconomic level, because that's what people equate abuse with. That's certainly not so. It's just because of the money situation. It's very well hidden. Because wives such as myself in affluent situations are afraid of losing their affluence, afraid of having to march to the welfare and food stamp drummer.
This was a woman whose husband was an attorney. She called 911 and said she'd tripped and fallen into the door frame of her kitchen while she was running to answer the telephone. Pretty clear that that's not the case.
Domestic violence develops as part of a pattern of coercive control. Contrary to the way most people think, it's not limited to physical abuse. It includes emotional, sexual, verbal abuse, and behavior like terrorism and stalking. Victims become isolated and trapped first by the abuser, and then by the people around them, who often seem to impose guilt or shame.
The psychological impact of terror, even after a single episode of violence, can be very far-reaching, very long-lasting. And when the violence is repeated, as it is in most battering situations, it can produce a state of prolonged terror and profound psychological changes that render a victim less able to resist, less able to fight back.
Domestic violence is often considered a family secret, yet each year an estimated 1,400 women die as a result of domestic violence. 2 to 4 million women are abused, and more than 1 million seek medical assistance for injuries caused by battering. Yet often those injuries and the abuse are either not reported or misdiagnosed.
It's only been really since 1985 that we've begun to understand that domestic violence is also a health problem. And what does that mean? That means that all of us who practice medicine, all of us who see patients, now have to begin changing how we see patients, what we talk to patients about.
17 years ago, I found myself 8 months pregnant in the middle of the night going to a hospital emergency room with a broken nose. I was treated for the broken nose. I told them I hit my head on a cupboard door. They sent me home with my husband. Nobody ever asked me what happened. And that sent a really loud message to me, which was nobody cares about this. Nobody wants to hear it.
These first-year medical students at Jefferson Medical School in Philadelphia learned to dispel some of the myths about domestic abuse.
And many victims report that that's the most painful thing about being in an abusive relationship, is the silence of everyone around them.
The batterer prays for your silence. They love your silence. They love your denial. You are helping them tremendously.
I have found scores of battered women in my practice. And so I think from a efficiency point of view and the need to get relevant clinical data, I need to screen all female patients.
Dr. Howard Holtz of St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey, helps physicians acquire the knowledge and skills to intervene effectively in domestic violence cases.
Women living under constant anxiety, constant fear of when the other shoe is going to fall, are going to present with illness. Without a clear underlying medical diagnosis, think to ask the woman about domestic violence.
But many women know what's wrong. For some, just a look in the mirror serves as a harsh daily reminder of physical violence.
It was swollen out to here, and looked like I had no cheekbone. It was totally flat on that side, and it was really purple. It just really looked like a little freak.
To help those faces and bodies that have been badly disfigured and scarred by years of abuse, some facial plastic surgeons throughout the United States are offering free reconstructive surgery. Shirley Lomeo used to look like this before Dr. Edwin Williams reconstructed her face.
It's one thing for me to offer my services pro bono or free, but another thing to increase the awareness to the point that women who are in these situations decide to do something before they end up with an injury.
We know that women who are abused suffer more depression, suffer more stress, more psychosomatic illness, are going to take more time off from work, are going to have more bed days of illness. So it's going to cost them from the bottom line.
Each year, domestic violence costs American companies an estimated $3 to $5 billion in reduced productivity, staff turnover, and increased health care costs. More than 50% of battered women are late for work at least 5 times a month and miss at least 3 full days of work a month.
When women are late for work, when they don't get to work, when they can't concentrate on their work, they don't come to their boss and say, listen, I'm a victim of domestic violence, you got to give me a break here, I need time off, etc. It just doesn't happen. So there is massive underreporting.
Mark and Susan Braverman run a Boston company that specializes in trauma intervention and violence prevention for public and private organizations.
If they don't do something about it and something happens on company property, it's going to cost them an awful lot of money and an awful lot of the kind of publicity that they don't want. That's not the way an organization wants their name in the media.
And the effort to deal with the violence at home can cost the woman at work, cost her her job.
She has to decide either I'm going to keep my job and stay in this abusive relationship, or I'm going to leave the abusive relationship and lose my job. But the job is so crucial to her being able to permanently leave that relationship.
Yet if the woman works and stays at the same job, the abuser will know where to find her 8 hours a day. That's what happened to Lynn. Lynn's ex-husband knew where she worked and one day walked into the lobby of her office building at the Polaroid Corporation in Massachusetts.
Every time you'd come or go out of the building, you're like this. I still to this day drive looking in my rear view. And even though he has passed away, I swear I see him sometimes. That's how vivid it is.
Polaroid moved her to another, more secure location and provided extra security after she disclosed the abuse.
They had a full-time person in my area watching everybody coming and going. Being an off-duty policeman, he had the picture of my ex-husband. Then, as I mentioned, they implemented that coding system where you had to have a certain code to enter the area or you had to be buzzed in. So that was an extra measure.
Jim Hardiman, in charge of Polaroid's Employee Assistance Program, is a corporate executive who felt something had to be done about domestic violence after an employee of 17 years disclosed that she was being abused. Hardiman decided to hold meetings where women could talk about the violence in their lives.
We met every single week, and for cosmetic reasons, the group was referred to as a self-image group, where the women were released during work time to meet an hour and a half every single week. And we talked about the abuse that they were currently involved, with the goal is every single woman in this room would get out of an abusive situation as quickly as possible. In 7 months, all 7 women were out of abusive relationships.
Liz Claiborne is another company trying to combat domestic violence.
We looked around for an issue, something that we could be involved in, that we could make a difference in. When we saw the statistics regarding domestic abuse, we were staggered. A woman is beaten every 12 seconds in this country. 52% of female murder victims are murdered by their partners, and 60% of women who are battered are even battered while they're pregnant.
A survey conducted on behalf of the company showed that 57% of corporate leaders believe domestic violence is a major problem in society. Yet only 12% of those surveyed believed corporations should play a major role in addressing it. 1/3 of those surveyed said the problem could have a negative impact on their bottom lines. But companies like Liz Claiborne believe that domestic violence is an issue that has to be taken seriously. Liz Claiborne has put panic buttons at each entrance in case employees feel threatened. Yet companies and experts admit all the security measures in the world don't always make a difference.
Now, no one can put up force fields around an individual. I mean, you look at the most protected person in this country, and it's the president. And how many presidents have we lost or nearly lost? So, you know, you can't expect sort of supernatural, superhuman things to occur, but you can expect a company to make all reasonable efforts to protect a person. And that may make all the difference.
The Family Violence Prevention Fund, based in San Francisco, is committed to ending the secrecy that surrounds domestic violence. In 1994, the fund initiated a public awareness campaign which involves large and small companies and the community. It's called There's No Excuse for Domestic Violence.
One of the reasons we've been working with Marshalls and we've been working with other corporations is because they have the ability to affect hundreds and thousands of people. In one day last year, Marshalls sent out information on domestic violence to 26,000 employees in one day. That's what we need every corporation to do.
Marshalls got involved in the issue after its CEO saw young victims of domestic violence firsthand at St. Anne's home in Methuen, Massachusetts.
The children at St. Anne's are victims of domestic violence themselves. They've not only been abused by dad, but sometimes mom. And almost all of them there have witnessed their mom physically abused.
That's one reason why experts believe it is important to educate children while they are young, that violence is not the way to solve problems.
We can break the cycle of violence that is spilling out into the streets. For the child who watches his father beat his mother comes to accept violence as a way of life.
Children historically, again, have been treated as the silent victims, the forgotten victims of domestic violence. Many times they are not touched by the actual hit, but they are touched by the exposure. They don't cause the fighting. The fighting is not as a result of something a child may or may not do. Unless we go into and break that cycle of violence that the mother has traditionally experienced, or break the abusive behavior of the abuser, that will be passed on from generation to generation, and it will have a progressive pie-like effect.
Judges can play an important part in solving domestic violence by helping courts respond quickly to incidents of domestic abuse.
You are to have no contact. You are to have no contact with her son, Robert. I am referring your son based on the fact that he is in fear, that he has experienced changes in behavior, that he saw this incident of violence to the University of Miami Mailman Center. It's extremely important that Robert does not think he is the one who caused any of this domestic violence. He is not to blame.
In Miami, when a child has been exposed to violence, Judge Linda Dacus sends both mother and child to the University of Miami's Mailman Center for Child Development for free psychological counseling.
What are we learning that sometimes is hard for dad, that we remembers? You seen that?
Not to fight.
Not to fight.
Not to fight with my mom.
Right.
And not to hit my mom.
Right, excellent. And so when we don't fight, when we're angry, what are we using that we learned here? What are we using?
Self-control.
Self-control, excellent.
Sylvia Jones left an abusive relationship involving physical violence and stalking. She and her 2 children went to the Mailman Center for counseling.
My daughter, she would hold everything in. My son, he would lash out, he would fight it out. Whereas now, he's a more calm person. He's more loving.
I only remember one thing, and that when I was at his house, and he was whipping my sister because he couldn't connect my mom, and then he whooped her so hard that she had on stretch pants. He whooped her so hard that holes were in her pants, and she was crying, and then I couldn't do anything about it. And then when he was finished with her, I was looking at him, and he said, "Do I want some?" I said, "No." And then he was in a mad voice. When I came here, I was so angry, and then they made me calm down. And then I wasn't mad at I wasn't really angry and mad like I used to be at my mom or my sister.
It was hard because I had to do with my mother. She was angry, and so was my little brother, and I was angry. And then my father always come around here, and he was definitely angry. And then I made my mother more angry, and my little brother was scared. And he'd come to me crying sometimes, and so it was just hard.
Shontavia felt that the counseling helped her understand that she wasn't alone in witnessing violence and in not having a dad around the house.
Before you got into the group, did you feel you were all alone?
I felt like I was the only person that had, because everyone in my classroom would have 2 parents that, were together and everything. Well, I'm not the only one that doesn't have a father, and I'm not the only one who feels sad about myself sometimes, and everyone can relate to my problems as well as I can relate to theirs.
One of the things that the counselors at the Mailman Center ask children to do is express themselves through their drawings.
He comments that I like my dad because he's a nice man, okay? Let me show you one that is in contrast to that, please. And this is a frightening picture for me because what it depicts is the father figure is a very snarling-like figure. Look at the facial features. There's some person on the outside handing him a gun, and the father is saying something like, "Say your prayers." The female figure is present, but what is most frightening for me is the whole host of small children that are looking on this scene, and that's the feature that is distressing. Let me describe what I think happens with children. They see their father as a split person. They see a father who takes them to the beach on one weekend and then explodes violently on the next weekend.
Just witnessing domestic violence isn't the only problem for children. The children are also often victims. In fact, in more than half of the cases where there's domestic violence at home, the children are also abused. To turn it around, in more than 70% of the cases of child abuse, the mothers are also abused.
My son was 3 years old at the time. He cried in the middle of the night and cried for mommy. Because he cried and woke up my husband, he got up and severely beat him. He slapped him so severe where his behind was blistered and was punching him around and threw him across the room where his face was bruised very badly and his lip was cut and it was just in a bad shape. His face swelled up instantly.
At Boston Children's Hospital, there's a battered woman's advocacy program called Awake, which offers victims not just counseling, but legal and social services in the community. Elaine, who wants to go to medical school, still relies on the program.
It makes a major difference going to the support groups. It helps you realize that you're not the only one who's gone through the abuse. It helps you give the encouragement to know that you can live without it. You don't have to stay in the situation. Life's a lot better on the other side.
It is hard for families to try to make sense of the violence, even after the abuser is gone. Once a week at a New Jersey church, women and children together deal with the aftermath of violence.
He would hit me for no reason sometimes, just because I was there.
He threatened to put me and my mom in a body bag one time, and he threatened to kill himself with a knife, and he was just crazy. I have nightmares about it, and my mom's been taking me to counseling and stuff. But when I go to a friend's house and their father yells or screams, it reminds me of what happened at my house.
By combining play, dinner, and therapy, counselors help families work through the memory, the agony.
Because it gives me and my daughter a chance to really spend some time together, just focused on each other and communicating with each other.
This program is to teach the family to interact with each other in a more equal way, with more communication, where mom still has some authority, but the children are heard.
In the mid-'80s, the emphasis was put on shelters for those who had been abused, and shelters are still a vital part of the system. But we now know that it will really take a fully integrated community-wide effort to save women and children from domestic violence.
It can't be a lone shelter saying, no, no, no. We need the clergy, we need the judicial system, we need police, we need medical, we need families of all types coming forth and saying, no, we must stop domestic violence. We must hold the abuser accountable for the abuse. We must provide for the safety and protection of women and children and victims. Without that, we can never affect long-term change.
Most communities want to say, well, this is up to the emergency medical personnel. This is up to the courts. This is up to the police or the families. Everybody wants to put this off on someone else's doorstep. And yet only in the communities where there's a close partnership among all the key players do we see a decrease in the incidence of domestic violence, assaults, and homicides.
Is she okay? Yes, she's okay. She's very upset, just like you are. She's very upset of being thrown around the room because you're a big guy.
In 1985, we had 30 homicides in San Diego. In 1994, we had 6 homicides in San Diego. That drop in the domestic violence homicide rate is the highest in the country. You're talking about over a 60% drop in domestic violence homicides. That drop is directly attributable to a police department and a prosecutor's office and advocacy programs that are all on the same page of music.
Most times domestic violence people and children protective services people don't get together on this issue, and we do get together in San Diego because we really feel that these kids are living in a war zone.
When things get violent, people start hitting the people and throwing people against the wall, then we've got to kind of separate them and regroup and figure out what we're going to do from there. So that's why we do what we do, so we can protect you guys.
You know, he got so mad that he didn't want to do it to me, so he started doing it to the...
So he stabbed the wall right here?
Yeah, he
okay.
did that.
Yeah, that's about right. So did he have these in his fist, probably, like this?
Yeah, because he was, why are you getting me so mad? And I go, you scaring me, you know, why you act like that?
Were you right here when he hit the wall?
No, I was sitting right there with the baby. I had the baby.
San Diego emergency. What's the San Diego emergency?
My mom here and Daddy are having a fight.
Is she hitting her?
We do a great deal, of course, in counseling and training our 911 operators on how to deal with children on the telephone. About 30% of our 911 calls come from children now in domestic violence situations. We view that as a good thing. We view that as meaning that the message is getting out to children to call 911.
Not only is that a gift to the children in San Diego to know their adults and their community cares about their safety, it's a gift as a prosecutor to have a 911 tape from 5-year-old little Johnny saying, Daddy's got a knife at Mommy's throat.
Lisa, where is he at right now? Is he still in the house?
In the room and got the baby.
Okay.
And he made some red marks on Mama's, on Mama's neck.
Since 1985, San Diego has focused on intervention, taking action, even if the victim is afraid to press charges.
We were prosecuting, just like you'd prosecute an armed robbery, irrespective of whether the teller in the bank wants to press charges. Just like you'd prosecute a drive-by shooting, irrespective of whether or not the victim of the drive-by shooting wanted to press charges. If you can prove it, prove it. That's your job.
A lot of officers here, I know myself, I respond to calls all the time where I invited him over for dinner. He's been living back here a couple of days, and now he got drunk tonight, and he's violated a restraining order, and I want him thrown in jail.
This is what I want you to do. Okay, first of all, I'll tell you what the law is. The law is very clear. There's no discretion allowed. The order, the restraining order, is an order from the judge, not an order from the woman, not an order from me. It's an order from a judge telling this person they are restrained from going into this home. So, if he is there in violation of that restraining order, whether or not she allowed him to come back is irrelevant, unless you can get down and prove on paper that she went over to his place and dragged him bodily into her home.
Victims who leave their abusers but continue to be harassed or stalked often seek protective orders, also known as restraining orders, from the courts. These orders prohibit abusers from having any contact with their former partners. A lot of abusers, however, ignore the restraining orders. In 1992, there were a number of domestic violence homicides in Massachusetts, which led to the development of a computerized system which immediately provides information about the abuser's criminal history.
The bottom line is it provides information. It gives you a total picture of who the defendant is, what his last offenses are, and the form also tells you how many restraining orders are out. We find some people with 4, 5, and 6 restraining orders out against them.
George Lardner, who won a Pulitzer Prize for an article in the Washington Post about his daughter Kristen's tragic murder, found that the courts did not look at her abuser's past record.
The boy who killed Kristen was on probation. He had a 6-month suspended sentence hanging over his head for beating up a previous girlfriend. He should have been back in jail the day he killed her. And if authorities had been aware of that, he might have been back in jail that day.
Lardner wrote a book, The Stalking of Kristen, about how the legal system failed to protect victims of domestic violence like Kristen. Although his daughter got a restraining order, her abuser was still able to shoot her in broad daylight at point-blank range.
I think it's still taken too lightly as a minor crime in the terms of not murders, but domestic violence, the beatings, the assaults, and batteries that go on every day. And if you don't take care of the little things, they grow into big things, like murder.
Metro Police, open the door.
He's wanted in a stalking case, and he's also threatened the victim's life and the victim's children's life, and we consider him a high risk.
In Nashville, Tennessee, a coordinated approach has resulted in a 70% decrease in the number of domestic violence deaths in the first year of the program. The focus is on seeing that the convicted abusers do jail time.
Parole violation, a stalking warrant, and assault. In the stalking, I've got a very long cassette tape of telephone answering machine messages that this gentleman has left on the victim's machine, threatening that he's going to kill her.
We've got men and women dedicated to nothing but investigation of crime within the family, which is unique. In most police departments, family violence is just lumped in with other crime categories. And domestic violence is unique in that it's a pattern of coercive behavior, and it needs a special kind of investigator to work on the case. You have to understand the dynamics of it, you have to understand the effects on children, you have to understand the effects on the elderly.
She fought him off and she fled and went over to room 127, called the police.
Well, I went to work with a black eye, and I got this scar come through my eyes where he beat me up.
Okay, then what happened?
I don't know. He stabbed me, he choked me. Then I passed out, when I passed out, I dreamed he was choking me. Because I wasn't out that long.
What came first?
And then he stabbed me, and then he said if I went anywhere, he'd kill me.
Margie, what came first, the stabbing or the choking?
He knocked me on the floor down over here, and started whipping with his belt. Has a leather belt with a big buckle on it.
He did what with his belt?
He started whipping with it.
Okay.
So I got up and got back on the bed, and he continued to hit me with his belt.
Where did he
and
hit
the buckle.
Where did he
all over my butt and legs.
Okay.
Because I was just terrified, but like 2 hours, I couldn't go anywhere. He was going to kill me. He sat down with the knife in his hand.
So would you do me a favor and go to the hospital and just get checked over?
He's been hit with his fist.
Okay. So I think maybe we need to get you checked out in the hospital, get you some stitches in your finger.
No, I couldn't go.
Set a bond of $7,500, and Mr. Helnick, I'm also going to put a no contact condition on the bond, and by no contact I mean not only in person but by phone or in writing or through third persons, and you're to vacate the premises until further orders of a court.
They've never been held accountable before. They've never been chased down by a police squad like this before. And some of them can say some pretty incriminating things like, well, it's only my wife, I thought it was okay, you mean this is against the law? You hear these things, and sometimes it's pretty amazing.
And we'll be disclosing to each other.
Hamish Sinclair runs the Batterers program at San Francisco County Jail in San Bruno, California.
If we can understand what it is that we're doing, then we can understand a little bit more why we're doing it, instead of just assuming that she knows, because I feel like I'm the macho guy. Yeah.
It's all Mr. BS, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
The bull, Melrose.
What does that mean, old Mr. BS?
Melrose belief system.
The old male role belief system.
Yeah.
Right? What men are being taught to do, what being taught to believe, right?
Right.
It's not a neurosis, it's not a psychosis. Violence against your partner is, to me, a political event. It's about the use of women. Our men have been trained to use women and coerce them through violence to do what they're told to do. So we take a re-educational approach, and we re-educate men back to who they were before they were educated by a male role system, to believe that it's their right and obligation. It's not just a right, it's an obligation to control women, and then coerce them into their control.
And then you gotta be able to go, oh, there's a fatal problem. Because that means you're gonna have to slow down at this yellow light and what?
Gonna have to slow down.
Yellow light and
stop
then
at the red light.
stop.
Stop at the red.
Stop.
Right.
Stop. And that's what we're going to spend 16 weeks trying to figure out.
Emerge, based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was the first counseling program in the nation for men who batter. Men meet in small groups to learn to identify their abusive behaviors.
There's one time when it got so violent, you know, I was hitting her like she was a guy, you know. I mean, I was punching her, kicking her, swear at her, such abusive, bad abusive words. I'd give her body shots. That's how bad it would get.
I wanted to be the macho man in the house, you know, and I think, well, that was one of the problems. And I remember all the time when the problem started, I always said to her, wait a minute, I'm the man here. I'm the one who take the pants, not you. And I was told wrong.
The more patriarchal the culture, the more men run things, and the bigger differences between women's power over their own lives and men's power over women's lives, the more likely you will have more domestic violence.
We just wanted to demonstrate that the law really has a lot of support from women and from a lot of people and from men, and that it has been doing its job. It's protecting women.
Puerto Rico has had a law making domestic violence a crime since 1989. However, advocates still hold periodic demonstrations in support of the law.
I've done a lot of training with the police officers and with the prosecuting attorneys and judges, and they have a very sexist attitude where they really, it's very difficult for them. There's a lot of resistance to implement the law because they feel it's a man's right to beat his wife.
In some instances, the police themselves are the abusers.
When the aggressor is a policeman, the impact it has on society is very severe, because according to society, we are the example.
Women are raised in Latin America to be responsible for their family, to maintain the family together. And that means that if they speak out about the problem, then they must maybe leave or they are separated from their husband, and that's against what they have learned. So they keep silent.
Anaida Hernandez's artwork has broken some of the silence. Her work has been on tour in Cuba and South America. She chose to remember the 100 women who were killed in Puerto Rico as a result of domestic violence between 1990 and 1993.
El título Hasta que la muerte nos separe. The artwork title, Until Death Do Us Part, questions religion,
because they are the words used during the blessing of a married couple.
Right now, in Puerto Rico, the things are going like wild. At least one woman is killed every month. Some months there are 2, 3 women killed by their partners. Sometimes they kill her and kill the kids and then kill themselves.
Hay unas características que presenta el hombre agresor.
Charlie was arrested under the domestic violence law for pointing a gun and threatening his wife. He is one of many batterers now mandated to have counseling in towns throughout the island.
Me enseñaron cuando chiquito.
As a youngster, I was taught violence by my father and mother, and I don't want to continue this way. This is the only thing that can help, because they teach you how to maintain a relationship with your family, and it helps your kids too.
Maria, her children, and her Puerto Rican husband moved from Chicago to Puerto Rico to escape the gang life. At first, the abuse stopped, but when Maria was pregnant with her 6th child, she felt enough was enough.
It was an everyday thing. Every day he woke up, it was like in a bad mood all the time. And it was like a slap here, a kick here, and punch here and there. I'm like, no, I don't want this one. I don't want to be the next victim. I don't want to be on the front page of some paper or on the news the next day. And I was always treated like I was no human being, not a human being, but an animal. It got to that point that I had to sleep with a knife on my side of the bed because he had an axe for me. I wasn't strong enough to get out of the place and the situation, but it got so bad that I had to go out. I had to go out and look for help. I went out of my house for 7 times. I leave and I come back, leave and come back. Until the last time, I won't take it anymore.
In some smaller Puerto Rican villages, there is a powerful stigma against speaking out about domestic violence. This woman would only agree to tell her story with her identity concealed.
He threw the cup and he cut me here. I have one here. I have one here. With the car he had. He started the car and then he pushed the... ¿Cómo se dice? Portón. The gate. And he hit me.
And it's a person that everybody knows in the town, so she will be pointed out all her life. It's enough for her that she's been in the court where everybody knows her, that the police know her, that everybody knows her family. So I think that's enough for her.
While the Native American culture is considered a matriarchal society, men still get away with abuse. The abuse is complicated by the vast, isolating nature of the Navajo Reservation, which covers 100,000 square miles in parts of Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico.
They say it's the man's place to discipline the woman in our culture, which to me I don't agree with. When he had beaten me up, I said, I'm not going to take this anymore. I don't have to. That's not the way I was raised. Yes, I am a Native American, and I should respect some of my cultural ways, in which I do, but that's not one of the culture ways I'm not going to respect.
2 years ago, the Navajo Nation passed the Domestic Abuse Protection Act. It was a real struggle to get that passed. A lot of the people on the tribal council are men. Just having men on the council who are making the decisions was, I guess it was a huge obstacle in itself to get something like the act passed.
Harvey James is a former batterer who counsels abusive men on the reservation.
The way our elders teach us is that the women is the basis of all living things. In Navajo, you call it inapit sasale, is what you call it, is the basis, the foundation of the home. But we have all different sorts of problems, and the first thing we do is grab for a bottle, and then we use it as a crutch. And then a lot of times that interrelates with the domestic violence that we have here on the reservation.
Domestic violence is everywhere. Jerusalem, as a religious community, is a place where many wouldn't expect to see a husband battering his wife. But domestic violence is a problem in Israel and is a particularly well-kept secret in Orthodox communities.
The very Orthodox will do anything for shlom bayit, which means that the women will go back and stay with their husbands. I mean, they'll do anything they can just not to separate families. It's really one of the main important values, not to break a family. Even if there is a violence, even if there are the most terrible things happening, still they'll prefer the women to stay with their husbands.
This has been a country that is fighting desperately for our survival as a people. And so it seems almost trivial to many Israeli women to say, I'm going to report my husband for battering me, when tomorrow this man may be killed in battle.
There are 7 shelters in Israel which are always full, but reliable statistics on domestic violence are not kept. As a writer and speaker on the physical and emotional health of black women, Evelyn White has called the domestic violence experience for African American women an especially complex and multi-layered demon.
I think many black women, and it's very, very sad to say, have been sort of conditioned to believe that there will be abuse in their lives by virtue of the fact that they are African American women. And I think that is what needs to be addressed, is just this expectation that our lives will have this sort of harshness and cruelty in it. The poet June Jordan has said about black women, none of us has ever known enough tenderness, and I think that that's quite accurate.
Historically, men have exerted control and power over women. But women and men involved in same-sex relationships are not immune to battering.
I never thought that I was in an abusive relationship. I never realized what that was. I never named it. It took me like 3 or 4 years out of the relationship to name it. I didn't, and I knew of domestic violence programs. I had volunteered for one, but I thought it was really a heterosexual thing. I never thought that I could say that a woman was beating me or abusing me.
Some states have enacted laws prohibiting discrimination against gays and lesbians, but they can still lose their jobs. They can lose child custody battles, even in a city like San Francisco, well known for its homosexual population. Even here, help can be difficult to get when a relationship turns violent.
It was really hard to be gay and battered. I didn't want my family to know that I was being battered. They were just beginning to get used to the idea that I was gay. And so I was, closeted, so to speak, about the violence going on in the relationship. And then after I finally got away from him, going to the police and getting restraining orders, all of that meant coming out every time I dealt with the police. He violated the restraining order 11 times. 11 times I had to file police reports. 11 times I had to come out to whoever the officer was who showed up at the scene. So, it's definitely an additional barrier to getting help.
Feminist lawyer Sheila Kuehl became California's first openly gay member of the legislature in 1994. The former child star who played Zelda Gilroy on the popular TV series The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis helped rewrite California's domestic violence statutes to protect gays and lesbians.
The domestic violence movement, of which I had a big part, has created the image that this is about the power of men over women. It's really hard to visualize how this is going to apply to gay male couples or lesbian couples, but it does, because it's not about gender, it's about power and control.
Domestic violence has been a straight issue for a very long time. It was developed the theories, they're all around straight relationships. It's men beating women, and men are the enemies. So it makes it very difficult to talk about same-sex domestic violence, especially when you have to think about men being victims and women being the enemy or being perpetrators, that women can be violent and that men can be victims.
Let's take it nice and easy. It's gonna be so easy.
It is an irony. Romantic music playing for a group of women who experienced anything but tenderness in their physical relationships.
He would just razor blade my clothes so I would not be able to leave. He took away a vehicle for a year, so that with 2 small children I was not allowed to leave the house. He would do, part of his control situation would be to ask me, did you call anybody today? And I would say, no, because you always lie to protect yourself. And then he would press the redial button of the phone and find out that you had called someone if they had a message, and then you would go right from there into another abusive situation.
Sue would only speak to us with her identity concealed because she fears her husband will find her and harm her.
I've got to keep one step ahead of him. And this time, there are the resources just to stay away, just to stay ahead of him, maybe by a day, but that's all I need.
Violence is a learned behavior, and it's learned at the home. And violence, unfortunately, doesn't stop at the threshold of the house. It spawns itself into the community.
The domestic violence problem has been perceived to be one only affecting adults and youngsters witnessing the abuse. Yet each year, hundreds of teenagers are involved in violent personal relationships.
Our studies tell us that 1 out of 8 teenagers is in some kind of dating violence relationship by the time they graduate from high school. That's about 12%.
That's why the Jersey Battered Women's Service in Morris County, New Jersey, goes into area high schools to talk about dating violence.
In dating relationships, I've yet to meet someone who got a black eye on their first date and then sat there waiting by the phone for that person to call them up. Okay? It wouldn't happen that way. It's a lot more gradual. It starts out with pushes, shoves, tripping someone, pulling their hair, twisting their arm.
They always want to know, why does a teenager stay? They can almost justify an adult staying because they're married, they live in the house with that person, but they can't understand why their friend who has no children, who lives with their parents, who isn't married to this guy, is staying with him. And they really need those questions answered.
Kelly knows why teens stay in these relationships. She was in a violent dating relationship when she was a junior in high school.
I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. I felt really loved at first, because no one had ever taken that much of an interest in me, and no one ever really cared about me. And I had other boyfriends, but I just thought he really cared, and that's why he wanted me to be this way. Well, I wasn't allowed to dress how I wanted to dress. I wasn't allowed to call my friends or talk to anyone in school. I wasn't allowed to wear makeup. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere without him.
After he dislocated her jaw, Kelly got out of the relationship.
It took me a really long time to realize that he wasn't treating me right.
People respond to conditions of terror in much the same way, whether it's in a war zone or whether it's in a one-family war zone at home. And so the post-traumatic stress reactions that we see in combat veterans are very similar to the reactions that we see in rape victims or battered women or other victims of domestic abuse.
One of the critical issues that I think we're facing across the country is that there is no place for women to go post-shelter. So what are their options if there's no affordable housing in the community? Their only option is to go back to the abuser.
That's what Kim wants to avoid. She and her 2 sons fled an abusive relationship. She's attending college, trying to put her life back together.
Do problem number 2.
Kim's 45 days at the shelter are up. She's received an extension, but time is running out.
It's getting to the point where I might have to go back just to have a roof over my kid's head. And I know it's really a really stupid mistake. I've come this far, but I don't want my kids to be on the street.
Because transitional housing wasn't available, Kim felt she had to go back to her abuser. Such housing does exist in an adjoining county.
Transition means from homelessness to self-sufficiency in their definition. And of course, that's everybody's goal for any homeless population. Our people are homeless because of domestic violence.
Up to 50% of all homeless women and children in the United States are fleeing an abusive relationship. Samantha Wynn and her son could have been counted in that statistic, but instead were able to go from the safety of a shelter into transitional housing, and now are packing up to move into their own place.
Nobody in my family wouldn't help me. So when I came here, it was the best move that I did, because I came here, I got help for me and my son, especially for my son.
In 1995, the federal government formed a 40-member advisory council to help coordinate efforts to fight violence against women and advise the federal government on how to implement the Violence Against Women Act.
We leave, by and large, law enforcement prosecution to the local level. One of the great things about the Violence Against Women Act is that once we discover what works, we will try to promote certain kinds of laws and certain kinds of responses and strategies. Because if it works in Quincy, maybe it'll work in Des Moines, Iowa.
Grassroots community efforts are taking place throughout the country. In Boston, the Jane Doe Walk for Women's Safety each year memorializes thousands of women who have fled to escape the violence in their lives.
The goal of the Walk for Women's Safety is to create a community of intolerance, of thousands of women and men who can walk and at the same time raise money for other battered women, other Jane Does who may need a few dollars just to get out of town, to change the locks on their door, maybe pay the first month's security deposit or whatever, some emergency needs that battered women may have.
Silent marches across the country also raise awareness. Here in New Jersey, participants carried life-size silhouettes representing domestic violence victims from the state's 21 counties, some of whom were murdered. Domestic violence flourishes because of silence. But in storefront and office windows in 6 Connecticut towns, there's a small but noticeable sticker that lets people know that a free phone is available to call for help.
You can use the phone in this business to call Women's Emergency Services or the police, and nobody would bother you about it. And it would be safe, and you could stay in the business until the cops came or until you could leave. And it was really a way of getting abusers to know that they weren't just being accepted and it wasn't tolerated.
Domestic violence is also not tolerated at Michigan State University, where the nation's first on-campus safe place is open to students, faculty, staff, and their partners. Some former victims have not forgotten the terror in which they once lived. Many have dedicated their lives to helping victims still in danger. There's Linda Jones from Chicago, a former battered woman who has formed a company which provides free bodyguards to victims whose lives are in danger.
The men are not just looking for them to beat them, they're looking for them to kill them. So we supply security agents. We take them to school, to work, back and forth to each court date, because that's where stalkers know you're going to be.
And there's Linda Faye Walls, whose ex-boyfriend, now on death row, battered and stalked her for months prior to burning her house down and killing her 4 children.
He would say that he would kill my family, kill members of my family if I tried to leave, where if I left, he could not find me. He still had access to my family.
When a person is stalking you, that person has declared war on you, okay?
But instead of giving up, Walls began to teach women how to protect themselves from stalkers.
There has been at least 2 stalking victims in Illinois that I have helped, and I know I helped because, for one thing, they could not even get a restraining order.
Not only have former victims dedicated their lives to stopping abuse, but others who just want to get involved volunteer to stop the violence.
We believe that our support groups, the peer support, is a vital part of intervention with victims.
In Somerset County, New Jersey, the Resource Center for Women and Their Children trains members of the community to become domestic violence crisis intervention counselors.
And I would hope that somehow by being part of a domestic violence team, intervention team, that in my own little way, I would be able to model to abusers a gentler, more understanding male image.
There is no research to support the notion that women with specific personality traits, like poor self-esteem, are more likely to be battered. And people often don't understand that the victim is the expert on the safest move to make.
Many women who are battered are murdered right after getting a domestic violence restraining order, right after separating. And and I always trust a battered woman to know. She knows much better than I. I can say whatever, you can say whatever, but that woman in that situation, she knows whether she's safe or not.
I think violence, and particularly domestic violence, makes people feel scared and vulnerable and helpless.
All right. 60 days contempt. Take him downstairs.
It is absolutely still true that some people continue to blame victims, say what did they do to provoke the violence, or why doesn't she leave? But it's also true, I think you are seeing a change, and that change has now switched us from the question of what's wrong with her, or why does she say, to why does he do this, and how can we stop him?
Under your summary contempt, he's sentenced to 60 days in the House of Corrections. 90 days in the
Love you too, Candy.
No one should go through it. Get out. It's as simple as that.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. Even if you can't see it, it's still there. And you have to believe in yourself.
I'm at peace. I feel so safe. Yeah, and there's no excuse to go back.
There's help out there. There's a safe place, especially for the kids.
You can't let that fear immobilize you when you consider the consequence.
Seek out help. Unisolate yourself. There are people out there who will help you. There are people out there who will love you. There are people out there who you can love. Life goes on.
If after watching this program you feel you are experiencing any form of domestic violence, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE for the phone number of the program nearest you, a program that can help.